Hello and welcome everybody. Today we are breaking down the top 16 from the first Mox Masters back after the Invitational. We have Mox Masters December 23 here. Now I did not get to participate in this particular Mox Masters as I was out seeing real life friends playing some Magic in person. While you're here on YouTube, if you like videos like this, make sure to hit like and subscribe. They help out the video a ton. And we're going to be talking about cEDH coaching, which you can inquire about later in this video. But without further ado, let's break down this top 16 and talk about some of the decks that performed well today. We have cEDH Blue Farm here by IH Cannon. We have this pretty not standard blue farm for nowadays. This is a blue farm that's very reminiscent of like what 2021 blue farm kind of looked like. Not like so many crazy different includes, but you know, the inclusion of Dress Down, I guess Smothering Tithe is one of the cards that is now recently being added to more and more blue farm lists, but this list is also pushing more towards the higher end of like the Peer into the Abyss style blue farm with playing cards like Culling the Weak, which I know a significant amount of the blue farm decks in the format are starting to move away from. So definitely interesting to see that. We have March of Swirling Mist, which isn't quite played as much nowadays, which I will say it is very good with buying yourself a certain amount of tempo with blue farm decks especially. Blue farm is one of the de facto mid-range decks of the format, considered one of the best. The ability to pivot from, drawing a bunch of cards with your mana value in the command zone with your commanders, getting a bunch of card advantage that way, and then pivoting to combos by using Thoracle plus Demonic Consultation and Tainted Pact. We have our ad nauseum lines, of course, trying to draw a significant portion of our deck that way, and then winning with Underworld Breach as well. So congrats to ICAN for this top 16 performance. In 15th, we have Nevi here with Lost in Translation. This is their Rog Silas list that they have been playing for quite some time. Nevi has been attending a lot of tournaments this year with this Rog Silas list. Not too many crazy changes from the Rog Silas list they've been playing. It's 24 lands, the same old enchantment package using Necro for Born Upon the Wind stuff. The deck is also known for playing all 4 of the wheel effects, all 3 of the Tech and Extra Turn effects. I mean, this is the fastest deck in the format and consistently trying to be the fastest deck in the format, pushing out a ton of quick wins. There's so few actual like engines in this deck. They have Rhystic Study and Mystic Remora, but there's no One Rings, there's no Talions, which I know some lists are moving to, but Nevi's really pushing the boundaries with how fast we can really push this Rog Style list, having the Conqueror's Flail and Defense Grid to really make those wins happen, which are pretty vital nowadays in the current cEDH landscape. So congrats for the top 16. PTT, yet here again with the King's Kitten 2. This mid-range list that seemingly only PTD can start to pull out wins with is here, trying to make all of these infinite mana combos possible. We have the Teferi plus Displacer Kitten, which isn't infinite mana, but it's a draw your entire deck combo. We have Luris and Displacer Kitten with either Lotus Petal or Lion's Eye Diamond. You have Deadeye Navigator or Emil plus Dockside Extortionist. Obviously, amazing ways to make infinite mana. You can do Fimage loops with Kenrith. This list is really moving away from the sort of Adnaz style Kenrith lists that are pretty popular nowadays and playing like breach lines still, but using intuition to really throw those lines together and choosing more to lie towards just a mid-range-esque list. A little surprised to see Culling Ritual in this list, not because it's not powerful, because in the format right now, there are certain decks that really fold to this card, but more so because of the fact that it has not the most amount of things to channel all of that mana into, right? Because there's no Adnaz, no Peer into the Abyss, stuff like that. You really have to use the green mana from these spells a little bit more so than you would in other lists. So definitely not the craziest outlet for Culling Ritual. But apart from that, this is a list that PTD has been doing quite well with and pretty consistent, like making a lot of top 16s lately. I know they've done a few more results that are just better than the top 16 as well. So really pulling out all the stops with this deck. We have Wounded Satellite back here with his Grind Them into Dust primer. Let's see if there's any changes from the list he's been playing for quite some time. Okay, so no major sweeping changes in the deck for about 2 months, meaning that this is the same primer that he's been running for quite some while. I guess since I've last seen him in person, there's no copy artifact in the list, which was kind of a staple of the deck for quite some time, but I'm glad he's moved off of it. As I think like the biggest storyline from this deck has been the addition of Trinisphere, and I feel like Trinisphere has fully locked itself in as an inclusion in this list. We have one ring here, generate much card advantage. This deck is definitely one of the decks that most greatly benefited from the printing of the one ring, and arguably I would think Kinnan is close to the best one ring deck in the format. You have Seedborn Muse to really break the card, but genuinely, it refills the cards in your hand, which is one of the things you suffer as a deficit from. I'm always surprised to see, Sylvan Library in this deck, but I get the lack of inclusion here for sure. But yeah, this mid-range Kinnan deck from Wounded Satellite has been giving him pretty consistent results all year. A lot of top 16s this year, putting up good numbers with this deck. And, I am always of the camp that it's one of the best decks in the format, if not, top 3. So it makes sense that it's going to be continually doing pretty well. We have Doc Lime here on a deck name that you guys can read, and I'm not going to say out loud. We have this Turbo Najeela list here today. The idea being that we have a bunch of different layered combos, right? So we have Derevi plus Najeela, Grim Hireling plus Najeela there to make infinite creature combats for your warriors. But then obviously having the pivot for the ad nauseum lines present in the deck, Underworld Breach stuff. Interesting to see the Blind Obedience and Smothering Tide includes. Najeela's not exactly fantastic at being able to convert a bunch of mana outside of itself, outside of just activating and giving more activation. So kind of interesting to see Smothering Tide here when you really don't have a ton of card advantage in the command zone. We have the one ring here for a bunch of card draw. No other outlets outside of that apart from the normal Rhystic Mystic packages. So Najeela, 5-color good stuff pile is still alive and well in the metagame, still able to pull up results every once in a while. Not as dominant as it was maybe about 6 to 8 months ago, but still one of the easy contenders for top decks in the format for sure. Now, I will say this tournament, as you may be able to tell by the name and thumbnail of this video, depending on what I end up actually finally naming the final piece here, but Sisay absolutely dominated this tournament. There were 4 of the top 16 spots dominated by Sisay decks, and this is one of them. We have sprinkles here with Dracarys. Reference to Game of Thrones that I now get as I've just watched that. But we have a pretty classic, Sisay list, 5-color Sisay. This is actually, apart from the Cultist of the Absolute, very, very similar to the list I've been running a good amount of. I noticed that, a lot of Sisay lists tend to look very similar, but having a lot of the, especially the top end includes here, are pretty similar. Although I'm seeing things like Essica, Adric, which I think is definitely starting to become more and more played in these Sisay lists. I think Malcolm was really on the pulse about starting to throw that into a lot of the lists, and being either a stifle or a trigger doubler in this deck is pretty sick. We have the inclusion of Bowmasters 99, which I know a lot of Sisay players are hit or miss on. Some people think it's really awesome. Some people don't think it's very necessary. A lot of the free interaction here, and up to Deadly Relic for this deck, where I know some Sisay lists are a little light on it. And we have even Fire Covenant here to be able to really handle those one-sided interactions, and also very good if you're playing the Sisay Mirror, I'd argue. So that part's pretty sweet. I also like seeing Galadriel Dismissal, because Sisay is a deck that really does care about your board state, and if you don't get wiped by a board wipe, it's pretty good to be able to handle that. And then obviously if your opponent's trying to do creature combo things, it's nice to be able to phase out their board for a turn so you can try and dig for an answer. Kind of interesting here seeing Cultist of the Absolute with Dihada, but no Chromatic Orrery payoff, or that's kind of interesting. I know some lists have been experimenting on like which one of these do you include. I tend to lean towards Dihada and none of the other two, but Cultist plus Dihada plus the inability to push it further is kind of interesting. We have Scoop and Response here with most reasonable includes Sisay. Given that there are so many Sisay lists in this tournament, we're going to talk about some of the differences between the lists here. So we highlighted some of the important cards in the Dracarys list, but let's talk about some of the ones showing up here. Invigorate is one that I definitely have zero idea why that's included in Sisay. I guess, well, I shouldn't say zero idea. I guess it does make sense. This is a free way to make Sisay have 5 power, which is not something I thought I would be seeing in a Sisay list. I don't know that it actually changes a lot of the combos. I guess if you have Dockside plus Sisay and no legends, then I guess that part of the combo is really nice. But I feel like if you have Bloom Tender or Faber Elder, you kind of need all of the colors to continue tapping for Sisay activations anyways. So definitely an interesting include. I would definitely categorize that as a spicy take for this deck, but I do kind of like it's a pretty unique take on a card to play in there. And especially once again, if they're in situations where you have one of your enablers and you don't have any of your legends in the field, usually you can, explain to the table that you have no chance of winning the game. But I guess with Invigorate, this is sort of those sneaky cards that allows you to like steal a win out of nowhere. I've also noticed the most reasonable include Sisay list has a few more stacks pieces in it, things like Deafening Silence, Blind Obedience to be able to slow our opponents down. Also, I think the biggest spice of this deck is the Virtue of Knowledge, which kind of reminds me of like, why wouldn't you just play Adric in the deck? Because it's a legend that adds to your plan. But Virtue of Knowledge allows you to copy an activated or triggered ability, and you can choose new targets. So obviously, if you activate Sisay, hold priority, you can cast this instant. I don't know about this include in the list, if I'm being honest, but I'm down for spicy includes at any time. Also worth noting, I mentioned how this list is stacks here. We have Lavinia and Elish Norn really, being real clear points of the stacks year nature of this deck for sure. Manila Midget here with the Dog Water. This is the Thrasios Dargo list that Manila Midget has been doing quite well with throughout the year. They've been putting up good results with this deck. It seems to be their go-to list, and they've been doing pretty decently. They've made a couple top placements in some of the earlier Mox Masters last year, and once again with this deck. So we have our classic Thrasios Dargo stuff here, right? This is the definitive infinite mana deck, plus Dargo giving that explosive potential, right? We have Thrasios here, so you get your Dockside Temur Sabretooth combos, you get a bunch of stuff with Displacer Kitten. There's a bunch of different crazy ways to like make infinite mana here, and then there's a bunch of Dargo combos, most of them usually just being like you Birthing Pod or you Neoform into a Tidespout Tyrant, and therefore generate infinite mana with all your mana rocks. But there are other things you can do too, like using Greater Good for Dargo combos and stuff like that. So Manila, once again, showing up and doing pretty well with this Dargo Thras list. We have Corey here with a Fish and a Line Slinger walk into a bar. This is the Thrasios Akiri, basically evolution of evolution, right? So the evolution style Sands Black decks are basically all focused around getting Underworld Breach onto the battlefield. We have like 25 lands here. This really does feel like the Sands Black Rograk in a sense, where you are just trying to be low to the ground. You use your creature combos because those are benefits that you have. You can make infinite mana with Auriok Salvagers. You can do Emil Dockside stuff. You can mess around with Eternal Witness loops and things like that. But at the end of the day, this is definitely an infinite mana deck. Oh, and also you have Devoted Druid, and Swift Reconfiguration as well. And then the rest of the deck is a lot of ways to really get your Breach plan online. You also have the classic Spellseeker combo in these colors, where you get Spellseeker, you go grab Ephemerate, and then you go grab, I believe, the the first one you grab a Final Fortune to go take another turn. Then with the extra turn, Ephemerate will come back on the rebound. You'll grab your Enlightened Tutor for your Underworld Breach, and et cetera, and be able to turn Spellseeker basically into a 1-card Breach combo in the deck, which is pretty sick. Obviously, it requires a lot of casts, and you need to go into a Final Fortune turn, which can definitely blow up in your face. But at the end of the day, it's a very powerful, strong strategy. So, good job to Corey here for this top 16 with it. We have Bear Knight here with Blue Pig. This is a Tymna Crom Blue Farm list. This one definitely more towards the lists we've seen nowadays. We have Talions here. We have no One Rings, but we definitely have that Smother and Tide tech we were talking about. Imposter Mech, which is not normally a card I see in Blue Farm, but I kind of like it, especially to make the Mox Opal curve a little more organic in the deck. It's always a card that this list has sort of struggled to make work very cleanly, I will say. And this is also one of the lists that's been lately. I've noticed some Blue Farm lists are going from just Wheel of Fortune to Time Twister as well in the list. I've never really liked that with Blue Farm specifically. One, because I don't think you want to go too hard into the wheel effects, because Blue Farm is a mid-range grindy deck. And then the other thing being that you don't really want to shuffle away your graveyards. But in general, I think, Blue Farm is an extremely powerful strategy. We don't see any Dauntless Dismantlers here, which I know some of the newer Blue Farm lists are really trying to push towards, but apart from that, it's a very, very strong list and continues to do well in the format. Tackled Tundra 5 here with the real TNT. We have Tevesh and Thrasios replacing our Tymna and Thrasios that we know oh so well. As many people know here on the channel, I've been on a big Tevesh kick lately, so I love seeing some Tevesh spice in the command zone. We have Thrasios and Tevesh here being the Sultai version of the, Tevesh Crom list. Definitely a little bit more leaning into the Thrasios combos. You have things like Kinnan plus Basalt Monolith to make you infinite mana in the deck. And then there should be Machine God's Effigy plus Devoted Druid here. Another way to make infinite mana in these colors. You can do some crazy stuff with Displacer Kitten and your Commander Tevesh, which is also pretty sick. You can also make infinite mana with Hullbreaker, Horror, Outlets, and either pound that into Thrasios for activations, or, you know, bounce to Vesh infinitely. I guess you really sort of had the luxury of choosing which one of those you go to. This list is definitely grindy. I mean, you have Biomancer's Familiar in the 99, you have Shoulder the Apocalypse, and Fairy Mastermind. A lot of ways to try and outgrind what your opponents are doing. Culling Ritual in a very, very mid-rangey deck is kind of interesting. Once again, noticing no real giant black payoff for that card, but I can see how, especially when you have things like the the Devoted Druid plus Machine God's Effigy, right? Like, that's a combo you can fully assemble off the mana of Culling Ritual, so that part's actually pretty nice. Same thing, I guess, with Kinnan and Basalt Monolith too, except for you need 1 blue. In general, I think the deck is pretty sweet. It's the very heavy Sultai mid-range pile list, and strong enough to make top 16, even though it's an archetype that I think a lot of people are pretty down on in general. We don't really hear a lot of chatter about Sultai Devesh, but we have Sultai Devesh showing up for top 16. We have Donald Trump Politics, You Vote, I Win, hashtag knock cEDH by the Cowboy Bob. This is a Tivit list, and Cowboy Bob, I believe, has done pretty well with this list, going from a lot of Tivit play over the year. Knoxville cEDH has definitely a very concentrated group that has been showing up to a number of different tournaments, so pretty cool to see them show up here in this online tournament and do pretty decently. Definitely a lot of enchantments here in the Sisay list, Dress Down and Touch being the ones that are definitely the least common in the deck, but definitely have been played overall. We have Dauntless Dismantler here, one of the best pickups for Tivit in quite some time, just because Dismantler really helps to mitigate the downside of being a deck that feeds Dockside pretty aggressively. So Dismantler being able to tempo your opponent's artifacts by having them come in tapped is pretty nice. Apart from that, this is a lot of the classic Esper shell that we know and love with Tivit. We have Mnemonic Betrayal here, which is a very contested card in Tivit lists nowadays. I myself go back and forth on it quite a lot. But Tivit able to pull out the wins here and make the top 16 of this tournament. Before we move to the top 4 of this video, I want to remind you that we do coaching here on Comedian MTG. If you are interested in cEDH coaching in any way, feel free to reach out to me on any of my platforms, being email at comedianmtg@gmail.com. You can find me over on Twitter or at Discord. Any of those places are greatly appreciated if you want to learn a little bit more. As of right now, I have the most top cuts with different decks of any player in the past 2 years. So if you're interested to find out a little bit more with a player with that accolade, you should come check out. Once again, email comedianmtg@gmail.com. Find me over at Twitter or Discord, links of which all will be in the description down below. We have another Sisay list here, the Sisay cEDH combos by Jay Austin or Jostin. I'm not sure which one's which. But as I said, let's compare to our first Sisay list from this tournament and see what some of the differences are. So when we compared it to the Dracarys list, our first one, top 16 here, we have a few interesting pieces as far as inclusions. Noticing that actually the other 2 lists were not playing Ashiok. I know some lists are playing Opposition Agent, some lists are playing Ashiok. Ashiok obviously having the upside of adding 2 colors to our Sisay, right? Flowering of the White Tree is, I think, one of the best cards in Sisay that I know a lot of people struggle to cast. I know the double white casting cost was really tough. I know for me personally, that was one of the things that made me cut it at some point, but every time I see it in play in a Sisay deck, it makes me really want to go back onto that card. I do appreciate the amount of interaction in the Sisay list, playing a few more bounce spells and interactive pieces than some of the other traditional Sisay lists. I like their own Cyclonic Rift as well, which I know some lists have moved off of for sure, including this Dracarys list. Kalane is one of those cards that I feel like it's in a lot of people's first Sisay list, but then people move on, and some people move back onto it. It's definitely a little tougher to cast because it's the 2 least important colors in Sisay, but also that's good because it adds the least important colors to Sisay's power, which can be buffed by a lot of other creatures. So that card definitely has a lot of upside and a lot of downside for sure. Stifle, very interesting to see here. I feel like every couple months people disagree on whether Stifle is actually good in cEDH or not, or whether it should even be played. But here we have a pile in the top 4 playing the card. So we have your Priscilla here with the Black Cauldron. Now, this one is super exciting to see because Priscilla is someone I've coached in the past and someone who I think is just a genuinely great person in this community. We actually worked on this deck a couple days before the tournament, and Priscilla had said to me, "Oh, I don't think I'm even going to do very well with this deck. I took a couple months off, but I'm just excited to play something I really enjoy and see how I do." And here we go with them making the top 4, which is so cool. As I mentioned, Priscilla is just a really cool person in general, and playing a list that, if you've been watching the channel for quite some time, you will know that the Rayhan Krom is actually originally made by Steven, who's one of the people who used to be in my Massachusetts local scene, who has shown up and did well at LotusCon and done well in a number of other tournaments throughout the years. But here, now we have Priscilla taking that list and making adaptations for the local meta, which is really funny because a lot of the things Priscilla and I talked about were things that Steven had like removed for the deck from Top Deck Expo, and we had talked about it afterwards, and we were like, oh, we should definitely include like these 3 cards for the next tournament. So when Priscilla came and brought me this deck, I was like, okay, cool. The first thing I talked about with Steven was these cards swapping into this deck. But enough of the background to it. Let's talk about this list. This is a Crom Rayhan deck, and the Rayhan part of the deck might seem strange to people. Some of the benefits of playing Rayhan, specifically, you can sacrifice Rayhan to make Crom a 7/7, and turning Crom into a 3-turn clock is actually a very real clock in cEDH nowadays, especially if the game gets grindy. This deck is also a reanimation style deck, so the ability for Rayhan to automatically be turned on by Agatha's Soul Cauldron scenarios, where you can move the counters from Soul Cauldron around your creatures when they die. You can put a bunch of counters on Crom. You can then, if you have something like, for example, your Razaketh in the graveyard, you can then exile the Soul Cauldron and have Rayhan already have the abilities of Razaketh and things like that. So that part of the deck is pretty sweet, and there's definitely a lot of like crazy activated ability stuff that can be moved around for sure. It is, as I mentioned, not a Naz deck. It's a Reanimator deck, 100%. So there's no ad nauseum here, but you still get to play your 4-color Underworld Breach stuff while also using survival reanimation lines. You can do a line where, say, you have a Dork in your hand. You can pitch that for a Razaketh, put that in the graveyard, go grab a Spellseeker go grabs Reanimate. Boom, you've assembled basically a survival into a 1-card combo, right? So all of that part's really, really cool. The deck's very, very like awesome, but also like not one you see a ton of, right? We have, a lot of the grind engines of the format. We have Minskin Boo. We have Talion here, obviously one of the best card engines in the format right now. One Ring, a lot of stuff like that. Also interesting to see this list that is like definitely more proactive, but also only plays 11 artifacts, right? It's not going too heavy into the artifact package so as to disrupt the general grindy game plan that the deck's got going for it. But it's a pretty sweet list. It's got a lot of different balances going on. It's mid-range, but it's fast. It's proactive, but it also can grind pretty well. It's a really cool deck, and I'm super excited that a really awesome pilot, your Priscilla, was able to make this top 4. Priscilla's, once again, just a great person, and super cool to see someone that I just coached the week of this tournament talking about this deck make the top 4 with it. It's pretty sweet. We have Dreams and Nightmares by Nick Foles, Godo9. This is the Jensen, Carthalion, and Lurrus 5-color deck. This deck has, I believe, done pretty okay in the past before as well, but this is a definitive 5-color Lurrus and making a deep dive into this tournament, which is pretty cool. The idea here is that you are playing a super sleek, basically like kin to 5-color Rograk, I would argue. It's got like the ad nauseum plan, you got the intuition plan, working on Underworld Breach, stuff like that. But it sort of has the limitation, obviously, with Lurrus in the command zone, that you can't have any permanence with mana value 3 or greater. So, you lose your Rhystic Studies, you lose the One Ring, you lose Talion, stuff like that. But what you gain is a very, very efficient card in the command zone. You have Jensen there to like turn on your Mox Opals and stuff like that super early in the game, or Mox Ambers, I should say. And then you have this Turbo Naz plan, but also a layered Hermit Druid plan, which is also pretty cool, where you can get a bunch of those in the graveyard. And then I believe, so there's actually no Dread Return in this deck, which is very fascinating to me. I guess they really are just relying on Priest of Fellrites, which Priest of Fellrites is still very good. It just costs a lot more mana because you then have to pay 5 to do the unearth cost of Priest of Fellrites. Now, it avoids the casting cost of the card, right? It definitely opens you up to different sort of, points of attack, being that the Hermit Druid combo is a lot slower. You do need, once again, way less dead slots because you're not trying to Dread Return. You don't need a Narcomoeba. You don't need anything like that. But you do need 5 mana, which is also a thing. And then you also have, like, obviously Savines in the graveyard, which also could do that as well. So definitely a lot of different ways to be able to push that when you have it, but definitely a lot slower than the previous like Hermit Turbo Druid stuff, because you really kind of lose that option. But what you do gain is a very resilient combo, which is like Priest of Fellrites. It's very hard to counter and deal with when you unearth it from the graveyard. And then it just puts your Thoracle right in the battlefield. So that part's pretty cool. I like seeing Bring to Light in these decks. I feel like it's a pretty underplayed card. Cal from Mind Sculptors has been pushing this one a little bit more lately, and I tend to agree with it, as long as you can get the 5 colors on it. We have Unrivaled here with the Sisay Unrivaled build variant. Now, of course, we will jump up the compare page, take this Sisay winning list, and there's definitely one card I want to talk about, as I'm pretty sure it won Unrivaled the entire tournament. So a significant amount of differences between Unrivaled's list and some of the others that are going around. I think one huge one that's definitely worth talking about is the fact that this list is playing Underworld Breach. But what I'm noticing here is that it's Underworld Breach with Lotus Petal only and no Lion's Eye Diamond, which is kind of crazy. Definitely not a standard Sisay inclusion. So you're playing Underworld Breach, you're playing Brain Freeze, but only playing Lotus Petal as your enabler. There's also like no Intuition to go and tutor for that. But you are playing Sevinne's Reclamation even without the Intuition. Okay, I'm quite confused by a lot of that, if I'm being honest, but that's very interesting for sure. I feel like it's pretty easy to, even if you are going for the Lotus Petal thing, to include the Intuition into the deck, but I guess no Lion's Eye Diamond does make the Sevinne's pile a little bit worse if you're going for Intuition stuff. But yeah, this list is definitely pretty unique. I mean, we've got some... you got to shout out to the Colossal Sky Turtle. I love that card so much, and it's been one I've been pushing in Sisay for quite some time. This list is on Chromatic Orrery, although now I'm wondering, is there... Okay, so this is full Cultist plus Dihada plus Chromatic Orrery variant of this deck. Okay, Dihada up here. The very interesting stuff. This list is also running a lot of 4 and 5 drops here. We got Urtai, we got Sigarda, stuff like that. Smothering Tithe, which I definitely think is actually underplayed in Sisay at the moment. It's just like a little clunky about like, it's hard to cast a 4 drop because you're trying to accelerate your colored mana permanents, which means you can't really afford to include a ton of colorless mana permanents. And it's a whole thing with Sisay decks. Limdu as well, another interesting inclusion here in this list. And the one that actually won the entire tournament was Teferi, Mage of Zhalfir. So Unrivaled had Faber Elder and actually ended up just passing their turn. And with an Ashiok, the non-tutor Ashiok on the stack, Unrivaled is actually able to flash into Teferi, which gave them exactly enough mana to be able to go off with Faber Elder. Not only does this card have flash, right? It says creatures you own that are on the battlefield have flash, right? So you can start flashing in your win cons, but then it also says each opponent can cast spells only the time he or she casts a sorcery. So this is actually like an instant speed Grand Abolisher. Now it is 2 and triple blue here in this 5 color deck. So I'm not saying there's no downside to this card, because there's a very apparent downside in this card, which is the fact that you have to play this 2 triple blue card, but 2 and triple blue allowing you to flash in your win. And once again, that was able to steal a win for this tournament. Now, I will say Unrivaled did have a pretty stacked hand after a giant counterspell fight over a Mystic Remora for sure. And they had the Remora the whole time drawing a bunch of cards. But yeah, no, congratulations to our #1 pilot for taking down this entire tournament. Definitely some interesting exclusions in the deck too. You know, you don't see things like Talion. You don't see some of the other pieces aren't like super crazy, but the new Kutzils not being in there is kind of interesting. No Invasion of Ikoria, which is like classic Dockside Snagger for the deck. Kind of interesting to say as well. But yeah, this list is got some spice in it. I mean, Underworld Breach lines sans LED in this Sisay list is pretty crazy. The Teferi tech is obviously pretty cool. And yeah, this is definitely a unique Sisay list, but able to take down the entire tournament. And, you know, Sisay is one of those decks that people have to really have a big understanding of to be able to dismantle it, to be able to take it apart. And suddenly, if you start attacking them on an axis they're not ready for, vis-a-vis things like Underworld Breach, right? It's going to be able to take you out. So, congrats on Unrivaled for taking down this tournament. And that is our top 16 from Mox Masters December 23. Hope you all enjoyed this video. If you liked it, make sure to hit like and subscribe. And also leave in the comment down below, what's the most interesting piece of tech you saw during this tournament? You know, the tournament definitely had a lot of stuff that was conventional, stuff that we knew, things like Blue Farm, things like Sisay, stuff like that, but then had pieces like Breach and Sisay and some spice and definitely some crazy innovations. We had the Crom Rayhan list, which we haven't really heard of in quite some time, coming and making this top 4. So definitely a lot of crazy stuff in this tournament, and excited to hear what the folks have to say at home about it. So make sure to leave those in the comments down below. Thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you next time.
Do you lie awake turn out the lights. Is there something you're scared